faculty left double angle bracket faculty of food technology right double angle bracket department left double angle bracket technology of food products right double angle bracket discipline left double angle brackets sanitation and hygiene in livestock facilities right double angle bracket lecture 13 left double angle bracket biology and ecology of harmful insects in veterinary and stockbreeding right double angle bracket Есенқұлова Ж Ж Cand. Of Agricultural Science, ASOC. Prof. Lecture Plan. Insect Classification and Identification 2. Insect Ecology 3. Conservation. The biology and ecology of insect pests and their natural enemies in relation to IPM and organic agriculture. Knowledge of the biology and ecology of insect and mite pests and their natural enemies is a prerequisite for pest management methods compatible with integrated pest management and organic pest management, which rather than eliminate insect pests, aim to manage them. A successful management plan requires information about a species' biology, including its diet and life cycle, how it interacts with the environment and with other species, as well as species behavior, and how the behavior of both pest and beneficial insects can be manipulated to prevent or reduce yield losses. We investigate how biotic and abiotic factors affect insect pests and their natural enemies, and how this in turn affects their interactions with plants and other species. This includes insects' responses to temperature, humidity and climate change, control of novel pest species and invasive species, mass trapping of insect pests, how diet, temperature and genetics affect predator fitness, behavior, and performance in biological control, including mass releases of predators and parasitoids, and interactions of arthropod natural enemies with other natural enemies. Ongoing studies include the biology and ecology of predators, parasitoids, as well as interactions between macro and microbiological control organisms. The connection of plants, animals and soils. Not only animal soils are interconnected, forming a common biosynosis with their food chains and ecological niches. In fact, all existing plants, animals and microorganisms are involved in a single circle of life. As well as all of them are connected to all habitats. Here is a simple example illustrating this relationship. Grass meadows and fields are food for terrestrial animals. Those, in turn, serve as a source of food for predators. The remains of grass and organic matter, which are excreted with the waste products of all animals, fall into the soil. Here microorganisms and insects, which are detritivores, are taken into account. They decompose all the residues and convert them into minerals that are convenient for absorption by plants. Thus, plants get the components they need for growth and development. Insect classification and identification. It is necessary to classify insects so that we can organize what we know about them and determine their relationships with other insects. For example, all members of a particular species will feed on similar foods, have similar developmental characteristics, and exist in similar environments. Most often, insect species are classified based on similarities in appearance, morphology. The flies, for example, can be distinguished and classified separately from all other winged insects, because they have only one pair of wings. The hierarchy used to classify the diamondback moth, a worldwide pest of crucifers, is as follows: phylum Arthropoda, class Insecta, order Lepidoptera, family Plutellidae, genus Plutella, species Plutellus ilustella. This universal method is used to prevent confusion among geographic regions of the world. Consequently, Plutellus ilustella refers to the same insect species in the United States as it does in Asia or anywhere else in the world. Common names, however, can vary from one location to another. Insect ecology. Ecology is the study of the interrelationships between organisms and their environment. An insect's environment may be described by physical factors such as temperature, wind, humidity, light, and biological factors, such as other members of the species, food sources, natural enemies, and competitors, organisms using the same space or food source. An understanding or at least an appreciation of these physical and biological, ecological factors, and how they relate to insect diversity, activity, timing of insect appearance or phenology, and abundance is critical for successful pest management. Some insect species have a single generation per season, univoltine, while others may have several, multivoltine. The striped cucumber beetle, for example, overwinters as an adult, emerges in the spring, and lays eggs near the roots of young cucurbit plants. The eggs hatch, producing larvae that emerge as adults later in the summer. These adults overwinter to start the cycle again the next year. In contrast, egg parasitoids like Trichogramma overwinter as immatures within the egg of their host. During the summer they may have several generations. Insects adapt to many types of environmental conditions during their seasonal cycle. To survive the harsh winters, cucumber beetles enter a dormant state. While in this dormant state, metabolic activity is minimal, and no reproduction or growth occurs. Dormancy can also occur at other times of the year when conditions may be stressful for the insect. It is often better to consider insects as populations rather than individuals, especially within the context of an agrocosystem. Populations have attributes such as density, number per unit area, age distribution, proportion in each life stage, and birth and death rates. Understanding the attributes of a pest population is important for good management. Knowing the age distribution of a pest population may indicate the potential for crop damage. For example, if most of the striped cucumber beetles are immatures, direct damage to the above-ground portions of the plant is unlikely. Similarly, if the density of a pest is known and can be related to the potential for damage, and action may be required to protect the crop. Information about death rates due to natural enemies can be very important. Natural enemies do nothing but reduce pest populations, and understanding and quantifying their impact is important to effective pest management. This is all the more reason to conserve their numbers. What is biological control? This segment includes several paragraphs with general information about biological control and these subsections: conservation, classical biological control, augmentation, purchase and release of natural enemies. Biological control is a component of an integrated pest management strategy. It is defined as the reduction of pest populations by natural enemies, and typically involves an active human role. Keep in mind that all insect species are also suppressed by naturally occurring organisms and environmental factors, with no human input. This is frequently referred to as natural control. This guide emphasizes the biological control of insects, but biological control of weeds and plant diseases is also included. Natural enemies of insect pests, also known as biological control agents, include predators, parasitoids, and pathogens. Biological control of weeds includes insects and pathogens. Biological control agents of plant diseases are most often referred to as antagonists. Predators, such as lady beetles and lapwings, are mainly free-living species that consume a large number of prey during their lifetime. Parasitoids are species whose immature stage develops on or within a single insect host, ultimately killing the host. Many species of wasps and some flies are parasitoids. Pathogens are disease-causing organisms including bacteria, fungi, and viruses. They kill or debilitate their host and are relatively specific to certain insect groups. Each of these natural enemy groups is discussed in much greater detail in following sections. The behaviors and life cycles of natural enemies can be relatively simple or extraordinarily complex, and not all natural enemies of insects are beneficial to crop production. For example, hyperparasitoids are parasitoids of other parasitoids. In potatoes grown in Maine, 22 parasitoids of aphids were identified, yet these were attacked by 18 additional species of hyperparasitoids. This guide concentrates on those species for which the benefits of their presence outweigh any disadvantages. A successful natural enemy should have a high reproductive rate, good searching ability, host specificity, be adaptable to different environmental conditions, and be synchronized with its host, pest. A high reproductive rate is important so that populations of the natural enemy can rapidly increase when hosts are available. The natural enemy must be effective at searching for its host, and it should be searching for only one or a few host species. Spiders, for example, feed on many different hosts including other natural enemies. It is also very important that the natural enemy occur at the same time as its host. For example, if the natural enemy is an egg parasitoid, it must be present when host eggs are available. No natural enemy has all these attributes, but those with several characteristics will be more important in helping maintain pest populations. There are three broad and somewhat overlapping types of biological control: conservation, classical biological control, introduction of natural enemies to a new locale, and augmentation. Conservation. The conservation of natural enemies is probably the most important and readily available biological control practice available to growers. Natural enemies occur in all production systems, from the backyard garden to the commercial field. They are adapted to the local environment and to the target pest, and their conservation is generally simple and cost-effective. With relatively little effort, the activity of these natural enemies can be observed. Lassoings, lady beetles, hoverfly larvae, and parasitized aphid mummies are almost always present in aphid colonies. Fungus-infected adult flies are often common following periods of high humidity. These natural controls are important and need to be conserved and considered when making pest management decisions. In many instances, the importance of natural enemies has not been adequately studied or does not become apparent until insecticide use is stopped or reduced. Often the best we can do is to recognize that these factors are present and minimize negative impacts on them. If an insecticide is needed, every effort should be made to use a selective material in a selective manner. In many instances, the complex of natural enemies associated with an insect pest may be inadequate. This is especially evident when an insect pest is accidentally introduced into a new geographic area without its associated natural enemies. These introduced pests are referred to as exotics and comprise about 40% of the insect pests in the United States. Examples of introduced vegetable pests include the European corn borer, one of the most destructive insects in North America. To obtain the needed natural enemies, we turn to classical biological control. This is the practice of importing and releasing for establishment natural enemies to control an introduced, exotic pest, although it is also practiced against native insect pests. The first step in the process is to determine the origin of the introduced pest, and then collect appropriate natural enemies from that location or similar locations associated with the pest or closely related species. The natural enemy is then passed through a rigorous quarantine process to ensure that no unwanted organisms, such as hyperparasitoids, are introduced, then reared, ideally in large numbers, and released. Follow-up studies are conducted to determine if the natural enemy successfully established at the site of release, and to assess the long-term benefit of its presence. there are many examples of successful classical biological control programs. One of the earliest successes was with the cottony cushion scale, a pest that was devastating the California citrus industry in the late 1800s. A predatory insect, the Vidalia beetle, and a parasitoid fly were introduced from Australia. Within a few years, the cottony cushion scale was completely controlled by these introduced natural enemies. Damage from the alfalfa weevil, a serious introduced pest of forage, was substantially reduced by the introduction of several natural enemies. About 20 years after their introduction, the alfalfa acreage treated for alfalfa weevil in the northeastern United States was reduced by 75%. A small wasp, Trichogramma ostriniae, introduced from China to help control the European corn borer, is a recent example of a long history of classical biological control efforts for this major pest. Many classical biological control programs for insect pests and weeds are underway across the United States and Canada. Classical biological control is long-lasting and inexpensive. Other than the initial costs of collection, importation, and rearing, little expense is incurred. When a natural enemy is successfully established, it rarely requires additional input, and it continues to kill the pest with no direct help from humans and at no cost. Unfortunately, classical biological control does not always work. It is usually most effective against exotic pests and less so against native insect pests. The reasons for failure are often not known, but may include the release of too few individuals, poor adaptation of the natural enemy to environmental conditions at the release location, and lack of synchrony between the life cycle of the natural enemy and host pest. Bibliography, management and welfare of farmer animals. U4 Animal Welfare Series. Wiley-Blackwell Methods to Analyze Agricultural Commodity Price Volatility, the Production Technology of Functional Food Products from Raw Materials of Plant and Animal Origin. Thank you for your attention. Consultations. Almaty, Reinbeck Ave. 348 Fifths, Building 2,208.